at this event. It's an initiative to celebrate Bulawayo as a literary city. And my name is Drew Shaw. I'm coordinating the Centre for English Excellence here in Bulawayo and something that we call the Poetry and Literature in Bulawayo project. And today I'd like to welcome Siphiwe and Ndlovu and Bryony Rheam, who both received Morland Scholarships to work on new novels. So Bryony Rheam was born in Kadoma in 1974 and later moved to Bulawayo, where she attended Whitestone School and Girls' College, and then moved to the UK, where she studied for a BA and an MA at Kent University, and began writing her first novel, The September Sun. In 2009, 10 years later, she returned to Bulawayo and launched it, and it topped the Amazon UK charts and won Best First Book at the Zimbabwe Book Publishers Awards. And it later became an A-level English set book in Zimbabwe. However, she worked in Zambia for a few years before returning to Bulawayo with her partner John and her two daughters to take a position at Girls' College as the head of the English department, and now resides in Hillside. She wrote several short stories, one of which won the competition at Ntwasa Arts Festival in 2006, and she also won the Write Your Own Christie competition, which facilitated the writing of her latest novel, All Come to Dust, which was published last year, and he launched it, in fact, here at the Music Academy. Siphiwe Ndlovu was born in Bulawayo in 1977, but went to Sweden and then the USA shortly afterwards, as her grandparents were on the flight list of activists during the war. They returned after independence, first to a small holding outside of Bulawayo, then to Hillside, and Siphiwe attended Coglan Junior School in Bulawayo, and then Girls' College. So there is a bit of a Girls' College connection here, and we think there might be something in the water at Girls' College, because Navoya Shuma has also come out of there, and Sunyati, of course. It seems to be a place where writers are schooled. And of course, John Apple has taught there, and Brian is teaching there at the moment too. After high school, Siphiwe moved to the USA for 18 years, doing a BFA in Writing, Literature and Publishing, an MA in African Studies, and an MFA in Film, and a PhD in Modern Thought and Literature at Stanford University. So during this time, she made a short film called Graffiti. I haven't seen it, but I'd like to. And did research on Saki Bartman, and began writing The Theory of Flight 8 to 10 years before she published it. Then she returned to Africa, taught in South Africa, where she published her first novel, The Theory of Flight, and went on to win the Barry Wronger Sunday Times Prize for Fiction, which honors authors who enthrall with their imagined words. She went on then to write her second novel, The History of Man, published in just last year, 2020, and it has just been longlisted also, again for the same prestigious Sunday Times Prize. In the meantime, she moved back to her hometown of Bulawayo, where she's been working on a third novel, and currently living in her family home with her mother in Hillside. And she sent her manuscript off today, which is a great achievement, and you can talk some more, hopefully, about the novel that you have been working on. I was thinking about commonalities between the two writers over here, and firstly, both call Bulawayo home, and secondly, as I've said before, both attended Girls' College. Thirdly, I discovered that both had a gestation period of approximately 10 years before they produced their first novels. which then went on to win prizes and were amazing successes. So, fourthly, both are recipients of Morland Scholarships, and they've been reading one another's work, exchanging notes as part of a supportive project. And the last point is that they've both drawn inspiration from their hometown and set their novels in Bulawayo, otherwise known as the City of Kings, of course. And this will be the focus of our discussion shortly. So, as I mentioned, both are Morland scholars, and I'd now like to ask Siphiwe and Bryony to say what novels they're currently working on or they've just sent off the manuscript for, and to also to talk about the experience of sharing and exchanging your work with each other. Siphiwe, can I ask you to start off first?
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. So the book that I was working on is called The Quality of Mercy, and it is part of a trilogy with these two books. And weirdly, it's actually the middle book. So I published the last one first, and then the first one second, and then the middle one is going to be last. So it's going to be a little out of sync chronology-wise. So I've been working on that for 2 years now, since 2019 when I had the scholarship. And it was great because what Morland does is they give you a year to actually write your manuscript and finish it, the first draft. And so every month you have to write 10,000 words, which is a great way to keep a writer focused and true to their craft. So that's what I did. And then I took a year off last year, and then I came back to the manuscript this year, and I've just sent it off today, so that was good. But before I sent it off, I actually met with Bryony a month or two ago, and we exchanged notes. So she read my manuscript and I read hers, and we just sort of like exchanged, gave each other feedback, but also realized that we were also working on some very common themes and some common elements, and also very interestingly, I think, for me reading her work was this other notion, because I love history, and she deals with a particular history of the city that I found very fascinating reading her work. So it was an education to actually read her manuscript.
Thank you. Great. Bryony, can I get you to do the same? Sorry, we're shifting microphones and hoping that... Can everyone hear? I'm seated next to soft-spoken, kind of elegant people, and I think I've got a bit of a voice like a foghorn, so I don't think I need the microphone, but tell us if you can't hear us, and you can certainly try and turn the volume up.
Okay. Yes, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming this evening. It's really nice to see everybody here. My experience of the Morland was a very positive one. Just to give a bit of an explanation about it, you apply, they advertise every year, you have to put in a sort of plan of your novel, what your ideas are, and you've also got to prove or show proof that you are likely to finish the book. I suppose they don't want to just give people a whole lot of money and never see it again. This is actually the third time that I'd applied, so I was really happy when I did eventually get it. It was actually very hard work. It sounds great to be given money every month for writing. It's every writer's dream. But at the same time, it's actually very difficult. 10,000 words is a lot, on top of life, I suppose. It was, unfortunately, sometimes I think the wrong year for me, because I'd only done it for a couple of months and my mom died. But I actually found the Morland actually really helped me. They were very good. They said, take a break, don't worry about it. pick up when you think you can, but I actually went back to it quite soon because I just found that having that thing to aim for was actually very good, rather than sort of dwelling in that land of nothingness. So that was that actually, I think in retrospect, helped me quite a bit through that year. Yeah, it's you know, we came to the end of the year, and you know, I had a book. It wasn't ready. It wasn't by any means like ready to send off. But I then worked on it. Last year was actually good in terms of the lockdown because I had extra time to work on it. They then, when I told them that I'd finished the book, they put me in touch with a writer called Giles Foden. I don't know if some of you have heard of him. One of his books is The Last King of Scotland, which was made into a film. So I sent it to him, and what he does is he reads your work and then just gives you a comment, a very actually in-depth comment. He doesn't go through it line by line and say, I think you should change this word, or it's not that kind of thing, it's more of an opinion. And that was actually very, very useful. And then he wrote to me and he said, Siphiwe Ndlovu is also in Bulawayo, maybe you could meet up with her. And so he was the person who put us in touch with each other. And like Siphiwe said, we then met up and had a long conversation, and then we were also able to exchange manuscripts. So yeah, it's actually been a very interesting process. I think one thing that I found very beneficial is that as a writer you can sometimes feel very isolated, especially here in Zimbabwe. It's not like you go to writers' conventions, or there's not a lot happening in terms of writing. So it's so nice to actually meet somebody who's sort of going through what you're going through, who's also working on a book. There are some similarities, like for both of us, it was our third book that was the Morland book. So it's actually been very nice to sort of feel connected to somebody. Obviously there are other writers out there, but I think writers are by nature reclusive creatures. And again, it's not like a job where you go out and it's not like working at a school or working in a business. So it's been nice to have that connection with somebody and share ideas and share experiences as well.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you both for sharing your experiences, and I'm glad that it's been fruitful. We're going to turn now to Bulawayo as a source of inspiration and a setting. Indeed, perhaps even another character in your novels. So I'm going to say this has been a literary city for many years, Bulawayo. The likes of Agatha Christie and Muriel Spark have passed through here. Alexander McCall Smith attended Christian Brothers College. John Gordon Davis sets parts of his bestseller over here. Pre- and post-independence, there have been many writers, great diversity, who've called Bulawayo home and set their novels, short stories, poems, and plays here, co-creating what I like to think of as quite a literary city. We'll shortly talk to Bryony and Siphiwe about Bulawayo as a character in their novels. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to others as well who've worked to establish this literary city as well. In our midst, we've got John Epple, now celebrating his 50th year as an English teacher. A real veteran of Bulawayo literature with no fewer than 21 books, most of them set in Bulawayo. Then there's the late Yvonne Vera, who inspired a huge following with her novels. Violet Bulawayo, a Booker Prize finalist, who We had the pleasure of meeting here in Bulawayo some years ago, and scores of others. Christopher Mlazi, Zana Mtukulu, Racing Bayo, Quantum Klanga, many others who've written plays, Sunyati, Nagoya Rosa Chuma, Toko, Adonko, C.M. Eliot, otherwise known as Scotty Eliot, and many others who've been writing novels and short pieces. Violet Kitui, who's just published Mulberry Dreams, Elani Nyoni, Leroy and Ndlovu, and many spoken word poets. There have also been several editions of short writings from Bulawayo by amaBooks, sadly no longer active in the city, but there's that legacy of all of those short stories that have been produced by local authors. And there's the Ntwasa Arts Festival also promoting talent with a short story competition. So that's a shout out to, I'm sure I've left out dozens of people and I do apologize, but it's just to acknowledge a lot of creativity and talent in the city. Academics have also become interested in writing from Bulawayo, and Professor Tsitsi Elajaji from Duke University in the United States has written an article titled The Bulawayo Novel in Praise of the Parochial, which has generated a lot of interest and questions. And the overseas attention is of course very welcome and well deserved. It's my hope that it will extend to the full range and diversity of Bulawayo's writers in its reach. Like I said before, the Centre for English Excellence and the Poetry and Literature and Bulawayo Project are also attempting to foster a vibrant literary culture. So it's in this wider context that we're considering Siphiwe and Bryony's Bulawayo-themed novels. I'm going to ask both of them to read excerpts from their novels where Bulawayo, or the City of Kings, is mentioned, and where we get a sense of how you include the city in your writing. Siphiwe, can I call? Oh, you want? Bryony, you've got the microphone in front of you, I see. So let's start with Bryony. If you can, read something from the September Sun, and we'll come to dusk. That would be great.
Okay, sorry. This one from the September Sun is a little bit gloomy, but I'll try and make the other one a bit less gloomy. A wind blew in from somewhere, a thin, cool wind that no one noticed, but which eroded and moulded with its insidious fingers the very landscape we lived in. Zimbabwe changed. Slowly but surely some things died, crumbled and fell away. In the early years of independence, some things stayed the way they'd always been. But later, not long afterwards, things changed. Gone were the days when you had to queue to see a movie or a play. The queues were longer outside the video rental shops, which got the latest releases well before the cinemas did, and whose very nature, that of renting films to be watched in the comfort of your own home, seemed to offer what many wanted, privacy. Yet it was more than privacy, seclusion, the choice to mix with whom you chose, another invisible division between people. The large cinemas struggled for many years to fill auditoriums built to seat a few hundred people, prostituting themselves on billboards offering sex and violence in B-rated movies with unknown actors. The Thursday midnight kung fu double session replaced the Casablanca of my grand's youth and the love story of my mother's. The chatter and excitement, the rustling of crisp packets and chocolate bar wrappers was replaced by a silence, a sense of being left behind after everyone else had left. In the early years of my life, many people went to the park on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. They played miniature golf or went for a ride on the train that went around the park. They fed the birds, the ducks, the swans. They bought cool drinks and sat on the grass. But soon that too became unpopular. People stopped going to the park. It became less frequented and more dangerous to walk around. Someone was stabbed there one afternoon. The train broke down and there were no spare parts with which to repair it. The ducks and birds and swans were moved. One day a child drowned in the black stagnant pond. Her body wasn't discovered for hours. Now the grass grows unchecked around it, and broken white pillars lie where once greater things stood straight and tall. So the second extract is from All Come to Dust. For 3 days, Craig sat in the Renault 4 across the road from Pullman's Safaris. It was warm in the car, and the lack of room made it a rather cramped experience. As he sat there, he found himself thinking back to his school days when they were told that Bulawayo's roads were so wide because they needed to be able to turn a span of oxen and a wagon. Thinking about it now, it raised 2 questions in his mind. One, why turning an ox wagon was so important that it affected the width of the roads. It seemed a rather clumsy thing to attempt in the middle of town. We got tickets for doing U-turns nowadays. Imagine riding into town with your cart and 20 oxen and saying, oops, missed the turning. Let me just go back and do a quick turn here. Whoa there, excuse me, out of the way, please. The other question was why other towns in Zimbabwe didn't have the same wide roads. Did they not need ox wagons? Or maybe the powers that be had decided that ox wagons shouldn't have such sway and mastery over town planning. Such are the philosophical questions that occupied Craig while he sat and waited. He also people-watched. He looked at clothes and fashions and faces and at shoes and hairstyles and what someone carried in their hands. Not many people actually went into Pullman's Safaris. Craig was there early and saw Mr. Pullman arrive in his uniform khaki. He stepped out of his khaki Land Cruiser wearing his khaki hat at approximately 6:45 every morning, and he left at 5 every afternoon. He was the one who opened and locked up the office every day, and there he was, on time, every day. He appeared to carry some sort of miniature cooler bag, a newspaper, and a large bunch of keys. And he left with all but the newspaper, which didn't surprise Craig, as there was not much reason to hang on to the Chronicle after the 5 minutes it took one to read it from cover to cover. The news was generally a couple of days late, or wrong, or just plain strange. Stories about giant snakes who swallowed people whole while they slept, or a man in the city of Shenzhen who kept 1,000 cats and knew each one by name. Most of the news in the Chronicle seemed to take place in Shenzhen for some reason, probably because news was cheaper from China than other parts of the world.
Thank you, Bryony. That gives us a vivid portrait of parts of Bulawayo in your writing. That was lovely. Over to Siphiwe. Sorry, just striking with the microphone. When you're ready, Siphiwe, you could go and read something from your 2 novels.
Okay, so I'm going to start by reading something from the history of Rheam. And just to give you some context, this takes place in the 50s or 60s. So the hero of the text has just turned 13, and he is venturing away from his usual territory, which is you'll hear when I can. And I'll just read a very short paragraph. It did not take Emil as long as he had gauged it would to arrive at the edges of the European section of the city. As he walked down Lobengula Street for the first time, he marveled at how everything was so murky and grey compared to the heart of the city. Here it was as if the city knew that it could give up trying and had happily done so. But while the look of the place was drab and lackluster, its mood was anything but. There was music in the air. It sounded like the jazz his mother had danced to on the BSAP outpost, but this music was different. It was at home in its present environment. And the people he passed on the street, mostly black, sometimes brown, and maybe white, appeared to be moving to its tempo. Even the trains at the nearby railway station sounded as if they were choo-chooing to its rhythm. The music wasn't everything, but people deemed it. In the way men bow their heads in greeting, in the way women lifted babies and bags onto their backs and heads, in the way their hands, in the way they threw their heads back in easy laughter, in the way they waved their hands to known but distant passers-by, in the way store proprietors beckoned with would-be customers into their shops, in the way they stopped to glance this way and that before crossing the street, in the way their feet stepped on and off the dusty pavement. Their movements were not dancing as such, but the promise of dance. So that's from the history. And then this one, so this takes place in the past, and then this one takes place in the 1980s. And it's a little bit longer, so bear with me. During the day, Vita roamed the city streets, and at night he slept in the alleyway behind Downing's bakery. For a bum, a vagrant, a vagabond, a derelict, a homeless person, a stray, whatever he chose to call people like him, the alleyway behind Downing's bakery on Gray Street was prime real estate. It was best during winter when the heat from the ovens, which were turned on at 3 a.m., seeped through the bakery walls and made for a comfy and cozy second half of sleep. He particularly liked to rest his back against the bakery walls, letting the heat invade his body while the warm smell of baking bread surrounded him. For Vida, there was nothing like waking up to the warm smell of freshly baked bread. It made every day seem as if it would have infinite possibilities. The smell was like a promise, a contract even, the city's pledge to take care of the citizens, a guarantee almost of his ability to do so. He could not believe his luck when he found the Downing's bakery alleyway unoccupied when he returned from the war. Granted, in 1980, with the country newly independent, there had not been many bums, vagrants, vagabonds, derelicts, homeless persons, or strays. Just a lot of optimism and fresh thoughts. But what street dwellers, and that was what Vida preferred to call them, they were extremely territorial, quartered off entire sections of the city as theirs, the privilege of having plenty because there were only a few of you. The original colonial street dwellers had been exclusively white. The colonial city had, after all, been exclusively white. The original colonial street dwellers were comprised of poor whites, retired prostitutes, people who would have been better served in a mental institution, and a few old-timers that time and empire had forgot. The post-war period saw a considerable increase in street dwellers. Some, like Vida, had belonged to the armed forces. Some had been freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on who was talking. Others were civilians who had been traumatized by the war, but whom the overflowing mental hospitals could not accommodate. Others still had left the rural areas when the war heated up and removed themselves in the relative safety of the city. Most of them had seen things that made them retreat into an inner world that they had absolute control over. These post-colonial newcomers learned to coexist with the colonial street settlers. The post-war street dwellers were a truly multiracial lot, and probably the country's best example of post-war tolerance and reconciliation. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. And who could forget Downing's Bakery? John.
Can I just tell you a little story about Downing's Bakery?
Yeah.
When I was a boarder at Milton, in Charter House, PO Box 1595 Bulawayo, sort of bread. And I can give you every single name of who was there at the time. I sort of remember every single name. We used to get two shillings a week pocket money, and when we keep a sixpence of that 2 shillings to go to the Downing's Bakery. We'd walk down Selborne, which was in Selborne Avenue in those days, from Milton, dressed up in our number 1s with our straw bashes. I ruined a few of them, but I won't tell you that story. And we'd walk down to Downing's Bakery, and with our sixpence we'd buy a pastry, a custard slice or a Chelsea bun was a sixpence, and then we'd go around the back and guts it, and this was one of our huge treats.
You've evoked something familiar.
Reminded me of that time. 1960. I was 13.
Wonderful. Okay. Lots of memories from the city of Bulawayo. Some wonderful readings there which evoke the city in different ways. I'm going to start the discussion by asking, well, both of you really, why did you choose to set your novels here in Bulawayo? What's the significance of the city in your novels? Perhaps maybe you can talk about, is there something particularly inspiring about the place and its literary landscape? Is it fair to say that Bulawayo is indeed another character in your novels? I wondered, if you could say a few words about that. The microphone's in front of you at the moment, Siphiwe, so are you okay to start?
So I think for me, I just really love the city. I was born here. But what I love most about Bulawayo is that it's a city that you travel through, you can actually see its history through the architecture, through the industrial sites that are not as productive as they could be. But what I like is that it started off as this industrial city that was bringing a lot of different people together. And I think that diversity is what I love about the city. I don't think we've taken great advantage of that as a people, but I think that's the one thing that I love about being from Bulawayo and just the city of Kings, is that it is a very diverse group of people that came together, working in the industries, and so the city is very much shaped around that. And I think, you see the railway lines, you see the wide avenues, and all of it reminds you of, what was once a beautiful dream that, whether we realize it or not, that's another story. But I think, now when you come back, so when I was away for 18 years, when you come back and there's no Diamond Bakery, there's no smell of freshly baking bread, something's been lost there. So I think when I write, I'm trying to reclaim some of that, what's been lost. But also, I think, when you love history, this is a great place to be, because I think you're constantly reminded of that history. So I think when I write, and my books tend to be historical fiction, I think it's a great place to set those books, because we have a lot of things to draw from, right? You have, like I said, the industrial city, but you also have, the creation of this divided city, which has got this Lobengula as this definite demarcation. So there's a lot going on there. So the whole structure of the city tells its own story, and I find it very inspirational. So I definitely write about the city a lot, and it is a character. I think when I started writing the theory of flight, I think I was homesick. So obviously I was going to be
because you were in America at the time, studying.
But I kept on coming back home, and every time I came back home, there would be something that had changed, and I wanted to capture what was changing and remember what had been lost. Because I also feel like, even though it is a city that has a lot of history, we don't have many ways to commemorate that history at our fingertips. And so this is one of the ways I'm trying to do that.
Well, you do it beautifully, and I thoroughly recommend Siphiwe's books, both of them, because she really does evoke the City of Kings marvelously. Bryony, it's your turn.
Okay, so I think Bulawayo is a bit of a different sort of place, and there's quite a few different sort of people here, and I think that's what I find attractive about it. I think one of the obvious answers to why have I set both novels here is obviously just familiarity. If you live in a place, why not write about it? As a school teacher, as an English teacher, I'm always trying to get my pupils to set their stories in Zimbabwe, at least. Never mind just Bulawayo, but Zimbabwe. And one of the funny things, I'm sure you could write a PhD on it or something, is the fact that here in Africa, because many of our books, the majority of the books that we read come from other countries, our imagination, our imaginative landscape is actually overseas. So a pupil who's never been to New York or London if you say write a story, they will write about snow, and they'll write about things that they've never experienced, and they'll write about cities that they've read about in somebody else's work. And if I say, why don't you could have actually used that same plot, the same story, and you could have set it in Bulawayo, they always go, oh, but you know, Bulawayo, nothing's just boring. Nothing ever happens here, you know. And I think that's actually quite sad. I think, you know, everywhere has a story to tell. And one of the things that I find quite a lot of when I talk to people is that so many people have said to me, I've got the story that I'd really like to write. And, you know, whether it's a personal story, something that's actually happened to them or somebody in their family, or it's just an idea. And I think we've got lots of stories. People in general have lots of stories to tell, but I also think there's a kind of almost fear of being local, you know, and what that actually means. So Bulawayo, I think, is for me actually a bit of a challenge. I'm not a Bulawayo person, you know, like.
Because you were born in Kadoma.
Yeah, because I was born in Kadoma.
Yeah, I'm not either.
You feel like you can actually feel like a fraud sometimes, because you know you're sort of almost claiming something that you're not. And for me, my background was I was born in Kadoma, but actually never lived there. And early part of my life we were moving around quite a bit. And then came to Mine, which is just outside Bulawayo. So my sisters and I would go to school in Bulawayo, but we still weren't Bulawayo people. We were always on the outside. And so I think I always had this experience of being on the outside of a city that was on the outside, if you know what I mean. And the thing with Bulawayo as well, which can be quite frustrating at times, is that you seem to have to know everybody. You know, you have to have these connections with people, and I always feel that I don't have those connections. You know, there'll be somebody who says, oh, but I went to school with that person, and we did this together, and we did that together. And okay, yes, there are people I went to school with, but I don't feel I have this huge network that everybody else has. So, yeah, it's actually quite an interesting thing, and I think maybe I explored that in September Sun, how the main character, Ellie, wants to leave Bulawayo, but actually realizes that she really likes Bulawayo. And that was my own personal experience as well. You know, when I was at school, I just wanted to go. But then when you go, it's a place that you miss. And funnily enough, one thing I've always found is that people are always nostalgic about Bulawayo in the same way that they're not nostalgic about Harare. You know, people don't go, oh, Harare.
Maybe they do.
If you go somewhere and you say you're from, you go outside of Bulawayo and you say you're from Bulawayo, people go sort of like all misty and dreamy, you know, and oh, those wide streets, and you know, the Volkswagen and all that sort of thing. So there is this. I think there's also a. I don't know, what would you call it, this idea about Bulawayo as well, that other people have, you know, that it's this very slow place, and it is a very slow place, and you know, all of it sort of dreamy and sunshiny and everything like that. But I also think there's a great mix of people here. You know, I actually find the range of people quite incredible sometimes, that there are some really interesting people here. One thing I found is that Bulawayo is full of experts. There's always an expert on something. Like, you'd be amazed, like the world's expert on caterpillars, you know, lives in Machimhlopi or something.
Or mushrooms.
Yeah, mushrooms, butterflies, you know, and it's actually, you know, quite incredible that we actually have this wealth of knowledge. And I think it's just an interesting place, and Probably they're also the only place where you see people walking around with parrots on their shoulders. It's like, my brother-in-law, whenever he comes to Bulawayo, says, I can't believe this this guy with a parrot on his shoulder. You know, so they're sort of quite eccentric people here. So.
Yes, this is true. Thank you, Bryony. The good answers to questions over there. Next, I wanted to ask you both, what were some of the challenges of recreating an historic Bulawayo? Because both of you have written quite convincingly. You've evoked Bulawayo from decades gone by, what were the challenges about setting your novels in a different era? Another related question, how faithful are you to the truth? Do you always stick to facts, or do you sometimes have to invent certain places in Bulawayo, streets, houses, events, landmarks? I mean, is Bulawayo there in your books strictly factual, or are you sort of embellishing it a bit with fiction? I'll maybe give Bryony a break and start off with Siphiwe first.
So I think for me the challenge comes from, because I spent a lot of time in the archives, and I spent like 20 years researching stuff about Zimbabwe and Bulawayo, is how to make that seem and feel not like research, right? Like a very organic experience. And so I think I struggle with that a lot in the first draft, because I have a lot of this information, and if you go into the archives in Bulawayo, and if you like that kind of thing, then the stuff that you find is so very interesting that you might almost want to use all of it, but you can't do that because then you're just writing a history paper. So how do you then make that sort of like something that is just at your fingertips and not something that you have to keep looking at, like you referencing? So I spent a lot of time just looking over the notes and spending time in the archives, and then when I started writing, actually, I just don't have any of that next to me, so that I actually feel like I have, like I said, the place at my fingertips. And I think some of the things is, with the theory of flight, a lot of it was based around the same time that I've been around, so like from the 1970s to 2000 and something. But with the history of man, it's all mostly historical, so that was a little bit more challenging. But I also, I know the experience of walking down Southern Avenue and getting to the open site, I can.
And on the old street names, because they've changed,
Yeah.
and building names and all of that.
And I have to apologize because I actually, because all my works are historical, I just use the old names. And actually, I'm not very good at knowing the new names, so please don't.
It's amazing how big people are.
But yeah, so I think it helps to actually live in the city that you're writing about, because also Bulawayo doesn't seem to have changed a lot. It's changed a lot in many ways, but like I said, architecturally a lot of the things are still the same. So when you're walking down Southern Avenue, when you're walking down, you can actually recreate some of that because you're looking at the National Gallery and that kind of architecture, so you can paint that picture. So yeah.
Palani, you had a question.
Oh yes. After all you said, I'm very fascinated in your writing process. How do you talk about research and then going to write? What's your process?
Okay, so I think for all the books it's been kind of different, but I think what I like to do is, say if I'm writing like from it starts from the 1920s and ends in the 1970s. So I'll go to the National Archives and just look at different things, magazines, even the directory, just who's living where, what's happening. Adverts are very, very great for that, because then what are people wearing? Then I have all those images in my head. So when I start actually writing, I can say so-and-so is wearing this because I've seen an actual advert with someone wearing that outfit, that kind of thing. So it helps give texture to what I'm writing, but I don't like having it too much at my fingertips, because then I'm also an academic, so there's a chance that I'm going to start just like quoting, right? Like, okay, yeah. So I don't like having that. So I do like creating that distance. But I really, I think I should have been sort of like an archivist, because I really do love being in the archives, but I also want to be a writer. So there's that, but I really do like having that, seeing the history in front of me before I write about it, because I don't want to just imagine that things were almost the same or this kind of difference. I want to actually know what it was like. I want to know what kind of people were living in suburbs if I'm going to be writing about suburbs and that kind of thing. So that's my process.
So what fascinates me is that when you go to the archives, what are you looking for? What motivates you? What are you looking for?
Like I said, I can spend all day in an archive. I can actually just spend all day just flipping through even a directory, because in a directory there's all kinds of other things just besides the people, right? You get to know what was being sold, what people thought was important to sell, that kind of thing. You get an in-depth understanding, I think, of the time that you're looking at. So I don't actually go and say, oh, I'm going to be writing about someone who's walking down, whatever, so I need to know that. I go and get a context of the time and the period, and then I write about that. So I'm not going for anything specific. I'm going just to get an idea of what that time and place was like.
Thanks, Siphiwe. Good answers and good question there too. Thanks, Alani. Bryony, did you want to comment on recreating historic Bulawayo, the challenges for you?
I think one of the challenges has actually been getting the right information. So for September Sun, I did do a lot of work at the archives, and also for the book I wrote for the Morland has needed a lot of research because it's set in the 1930s. And the archives are wonderful. They really are lovely, and I understand what Siphiwe is saying when you actually feel you could just go there and live there. Somebody can just bring food in every day. And there's these beautiful newspapers and things, and you really get this idea of how people live and that sort of thing. I suppose the drawback is, you also have to think about the time, the era, and what was not said. So what's not recorded in the archives, or what is recorded in a way that maybe isn't quite accurate. Obviously, the colonial era, the need to present a certain idea of, white society, and that they were always doing good, and everything that was done was for everybody's good. You kind of got to read between the lines a bit. One thing I did find very useful was actually interviewing people. Obviously for the 30s I haven't been able to do that, but for September Sun I was actually able to interview some elderly people, and I actually used their experiences quite a bit. It was actually very interesting. There was just one elderly lady I remember in particular, who sort of loved telling me all the juicy bits. So it was her who actually told me that there were a lot of servicemen who came back from the war who found they had children that they could never possibly have fathered. They'd been away for 4 years and they had a 2-year-old. And how that was just, there was a kind of acceptance, like, okay, I realized, I've been away for 4 years, I've probably done a few things I'm not going to tell you about, so let's just get on with life. So it's things like that, things that you're not going to find in the archives, but you get from personal accounts. The problem with personal accounts is that people also remember things wrong. So that you've got to kind of check things up. Because somebody will swear blind that something happened in 1942, but when you research it, it actually happened in 1945 or 1938 or something. So those are the things that you have to check up on.
Interesting. Interesting. While we've got you on the mic over there, just moving on to, that's fascinating, the recreating Bulawayo as a historical place and the way that you do your research. Another question related to Tsitsi Jaji's idea of the Bulawayo novel. do you think that there is such a thing as the Bulawayo novel? And I suppose what we're getting at here is it in some way distinctive? Is it in some way perhaps different from novels that are written in Harare? Do you think that writing from Bulawayo as opposed to writing from Harare, which I guess is the capital, it's the center of power, does it give you a freedom to explore alternative perspectives in any way that you're conscious of, history, society, etc.? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, it's quite an interesting idea. I think that Bulawayo novels probably are different because you are looking at a city that's on the edge, on the edge of everything, and a city that's been largely ignored. And when you also think about all the atrocities that happened in Matabeleland in the early 80s and that, I think it does give you a different perspective on Zimbabwe. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe, I suppose you'd have to ask a Harare author as well, how they feel about that.
Yeah.
Do they see, what's their perspective on Harare? Are they looking at it from the outside, or are they writing from the inside?
It's very interesting, yeah. I think, Siphiwe, perhaps you've got some perspective on that question as well.
No, I don't think I have much to add. I mean, I think it is all about being positioned as the second city, and also, I don't know how it is in most communities, but I do know that, especially for the Ndebele people, with all the things that happened after 1980, there's a way that we feel like, our city is the one that's targeted. We don't get the, we don't get the development, we don't get this, we don't. So there's a way in which your relationship with the government, with the states, is very different, right? And so it's a more, I think it's an easier position to critique from, because you're constantly seeing things from the outside, like Bryony said. So I think it's a lot. I think what Tsitsi Judge was also talking about is how that then gives you this added perspective that sort of like seems like it's a little leftist, right? Like it's critiquing the powers that be, and I think that is definitely something that is you see. I mean, you read Wrong Mirror, you see that, right? Like there's this, but I'm sitting there saying Harare writers as well. But I think there's a way in which being from here does sort of like does give you a different perspective.
It's off center, and it's also been the home of a lot of satire. So I'm kind of looking at a satirist over there. But so perhaps there is something about Bulawayo, which writing from Bulawayo, which does give a what Tsitsi Judge calls a creative disruption to the national.
Can I just ask, since John Apple probably has more experience with thinking about this, can you maybe chime in?
John, would you like to sort of comment on that question? Do you think that writing from Bulawayo gives one a particular perspective, and that there's such a thing as the Bulawayo novel, which is in some ways distinctive from the Harare novel? This is a new paper that I've just read, and it's an academic paper, and I have to say it's quite dense, and it took a while to. There's some really good ideas in it, but it's quite sort of academic. We're still processing it. But it's kind of interesting. It's sort of this academic interest in Bulawayo as a place that is producing a particular type of writing. Do you think?
Well, I kind of regard myself primarily as a poet. I've written 8 novels, or I call them novellas. Of those 8, 5 of them are based in Bulawayo, and the other 3 are connected to Bulawayo intimately. So, but I don't see myself as a Bulawayo person. I'm from Colleen Hall. That's my case.
Okay. it's something interesting to continue discussing, I think. Are there any other questions? You feel free to ask anything you like about the novels that have been talked about, or any particular question you have for the for Bryony or Siphiwe. Any questions, comments?
Just a comment, really, I think. One point you forgot to mention was the similarities. They're both females.
How could I miss that?
Certainly, what I picked up was halfway through what they're flying, book 2. And I think quite well, they both linked on two characters who I think are very similar, Craig and Vina. And what I think your description is descriptive and emotive writing is fantastic. I think it's really is good. I've been reading through it and turns Bryony, obviously it's very emotive. This bit really picked up, even though you were apparently living in America when you were writing this. I think it's fantastic. You've got what I would call, and I'm an outsider for sure, the flavour of Bulawayo and certainly the streets, the scaling of cart and all this sort of stuff. Really, really wonderfully.
Yeah, I agree. I think I just think that these writers are groundbreaking. I'm very proud of them. And it needed to be known, I think, breaking away from the old some of the sort of rhetoric, that we've been brought up with, and becoming travellers, becoming citizens of the world. These writers are doing it.
Yes.
It's very healthy, and
Yeah.
I applaud it.
Is that theme of travel and
Yes.
and the identity and belonging and the diaspora,
Yeah.
and all of those themes come into your novels. And I've talked to Siphiwe in an interview which was posted on the Centre for English Excellence website, and I'm going to be talking to Bryony as well, also to explore her novels. But it's there's a lot. That's a common theme as well. The idea of identity and travel and belonging and characters who move, around quite a lot, but come back to Bulawayo, and it's all very interesting. One question.
One question.
Yeah.
How many cities in the world have got 2 Morland transmitters?
Well, I think it's quite an accolade.
Decided to kneel side.
Really, for Bulawayo. I think you can give yourselves a double pat on the back. Quite an achievement. And thank you all very much for coming, and onwards and upwards for the literary city of Bulawayo, the City of Kings.